Canadian government websites. They really do things the hard way. Why not just wait for us to leave a disk with 500,000 people's information lying around? Seriously, they shouldn't waste their best guys on us. We left everything in the driveway and they're trying to break into the house.
Good afternoon, everybody. You guys hear me okay? Welcome. Thank you very much for coming. I know you've got a lot of choice and a lot of sessions, so I appreciate you joining. I hope you enjoy this. Before I get started, though, I have to warn everybody, if you're easily offended, don't necessarily like, particularly colorful language or statements, I have to warn you, this may not be the best presentation for you. I've captured a bunch of information. I'm sharing it exactly as I found it. And you will discover me to be extremely open and honest about things going on. So I apologize up front. If this is something that you might find offensive, you may want to consider that. Something else I want you to keep in mind while you watch this presentation. No SSL certificate was harmed in the making of this presentation. Although I'm fully capable of going in and doing a man-in-the-middle and extracting SSL, encryption, decryption, etc., I chose not to for the duration of all this stuff. So what you see is things that I could just pluck out of the air, so to speak, not necessarily having to go that extra step. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kellman. I work for a security vendor here. I'm actually fairly active on Twitter. You can usually find me online on Twitter. I love Twitter because it allows me to engage with a lot of the social security community. And we have to keep it short because we only have 140 characters, so everybody likes to get to the point. I think it's fantastic. And you always find people online saying some really wonderful things about me, which is always nice. I think it's because I'm so darn helpful online. If you ever want to reach out to me on Twitter, For example, this one girl, one Valentine's Day, was looking for something to make her boyfriend's eyes pop out of his head, to which I suggested sudden decompression in an airtight chamber. Should do the trick. See how helpful I can be? I'm even helpful to technically my competitors. I know Cisco Security came out once and said, hey, what do you see about the future of security threats to Twitter? To which I responded, they use your product to protect it. They didn't think it was as funny as I did. It's a joke, I'm kidding. Come on, can't we all have some fun with this? But anyway, I should point out though, for all the wonderful things people have said about me online, there are people out there that have said some not so wonderful things about me online. And I'm okay with that. And I'm going to say that now because it's okay to challenge me, it's okay to question, it's okay to disagree. It's actually how we learn things. Because we tend to get caught in this idea of, oh, we know how it works, and we don't think about it differently. Different opposing views are a good thing, and a good thing in this industry. So don't be afraid to speak up. And as a friend of mine reminded me, it's always fun to kind of stir people up and make them think about things in a different way. I'm hoping I can do that for you today. But first I should clarify that title, Weaponized Security. It's a little inflammatory and possibly a bit misleading, because if you came here hoping that I would somehow teach you how to turn computers into weapons, this is not really the session for you. Although it's a lovely dramatic story, I don't know if it's really possible. This is really more a story about how I've used technology in a very, very different way. And this goes back sort of way. So I've been with Checkpoint, with the security vendors for well, actually coming into my 12th year. So I have had access to enterprise level security tools for a very long time. And as a consequence, I've been raising my kids with my firewall. And I thought I'd share with you now exactly what that looks like. To explain, this has been going on for a long time. If we go back about 10 years, my daughter, who just actually now turned 18, she was just a young girl, 8 years old, she could kind of surf wherever she wanted online. I didn't really have a lot of controls in the house. But I had the system set up in such a way that she could go to her main websites, the stuff she liked, which is really just nothing more than Barbie.com, WB Kids, Teletoon. There's a couple of sites. Remember, 10 years ago, everything's pretty static. It was pretty easy to say, look, if somebody goes here, that's okay. And then she could go anywhere else she wanted, but if she did, it would send a message to me and let me know what the URL was, and then I eventually added it and say, that's fine, she's 8, right? You gotta keep an eye on her. Well, I was actually down in Dallas. I'm actually from Toronto. I'm down, at some point I'll say about, you know, I'll figure out I'm Canadian, so we'll just get that out of the way right now. For some reason, I can't hide that word for you guys. I'm pretty good with the accent, but as soon as I say that word, it's Canadian. Oh my God, there you go. So I'm actually down in Dallas at one of our tax centers. I'm doing some work. And my daughter had come home, and I guess she went to this website called funnyjunk.com. And the URL, boom, flashed up onto my phone. It's set up, it was 10 years ago, it was an old like flip phone with an antenna and everything. Remember those days? And I see this text come in, and I look at the URL, and I think, well, that's really strange. She shouldn't, I've never heard of this funny junk thing. I'm going to check it out. I was connected right to the internet, doing some testing with some customer. I open up a web browser, I go to it, and it's a cartoon. But it was not what I'd call an age-appropriate cartoon for an 8-year-old. There was like dancing penises on it, things like that. I wasn't feeling too comfortable about it, so I thought I should probably reach out to my wife and see what's going on. So I quickly called home, and I said, hey, honey, I think we need to check on Taylor. She's probably looking at something she shouldn't. To which my wife responded, oh my God, how did you know? My wife doesn't know what I do for a living, by the way. I explained it, but it doesn't help. So I said, oh, well, I just had the firewall coded, and if she goes somewhere, you know, unusual, I know about it. She's like, wow. And what happened essentially was another student in her class had given her this URL, just written out on a piece of paper, and said, oh, you got to go check this out. She'd come home, punched it in the computer, up it came. My wife had walked by, saw this, and was just in the process of talking to her about punching in random URLs for kids, when I called and said, hey, you better check on it. So I was just, oh my God, does that mean you can watch what I do? Of course not, honey, although we'll discover as we go into this, it's probably not entirely true. As the kids got older, so I've got a younger son now as well. He's actually 12 now at this point, but he wasn't really on the scene at the time. But as time went on, it really got a lot more complicated than just what website they like to go to. It was what applications were out there, fast and furious, and changing all over. I really couldn't actually keep up with it from a URL perspective. It was completely unusable. Not to mention, I mean, the breakdown of what the kids do online was just completely foreign to me and strange. I noticed, for example, as a social networking guy, I use LinkedIn because, hey, you know, how do you work in IT and not have a LinkedIn account? And then I got Twitter because I thought it was kind of cool the way you could engage with people that way, and it's very quick and easy. And I got kind of pushed into Facebook, you know, to connect with family and some old friends. And then I'm like, that's enough. I'm done. Who has time for all of this stuff? But my daughter, on the other hand, would log into like 6 or 7 different social networking sites a week, and they would change week over week. Now, she had Facebook and Twitter, and I remember asking her, why don't you use Facebook like your mom and I? And she looked at me, it still rings in my head now, and goes, oh, Facebook's for old people. And that's when I realized I was old, of course, officially. So I watched her activity, and of course my daughter would have her friends over, they'd connect to the Wi-Fi, and I'd also collect their activity as well. And I happened to notice something that finally made me go, what the heck is going on? And that was, they were all logging into a website that was actually for the Arizona Real Estate Message Board. So it was a bunch of real estate agents from the Arizona area that had their own little message board. And my daughter went as far as to create a bogus account with a name and a zip code and everything. Not only that, all her friends were too. And I was puzzling over this collection of data going, why on earth does my teenage daughter from Toronto have to have anything to do with a real estate board in Arizona? So I finally had to ask, because I really had no context of what the heck they're doing. I truthfully still don't know what they're actually doing after me. But I went and asked her, and it turns out it was high school all over again, except online, not in the schoolyard. What it was anywhere these kids could post or share a picture is social networking in it. They could care less what the URL is, just somewhere to go. So they'd have their main sites, but then they'd find these obscure sites somewhere, create an account with a bogus name so that nobody knew it was them, tell a few of their couple of close friends, and those friends would join that network and they'd talk amongst their other people. And then a few other people would hear about it, and a few other people, and then it would get really big, and then it would explode, and they would drop it, and they'd move on to the next social networking site, whatever they could find. So the poor people of the Arizona Real Estate Board got bombed by a bunch of teenagers in Toronto one day, and then they were gone a week later. And what really, really mystified me was, at that moment I realized my daughter, through no intention or planning of her own, had more online privacy than I did. My social networking activity is easily traced across to who I am, whereas she'd broken hers up, split it up across many personas, and spread it out all over the place. That really, really hit me. It was just something to think about there. Anyway, managing this sort of thing obviously was not usable, but thankfully the product evolved with it, to which I had URL filtering, categorization. So I thought, oh, this is great. I'm going to turn off this category. Kids don't need to see about alcohol. Kids don't need to see about drinking, drugs, that sort of thing. So I put in the policy, I pushed it, and of course I travel a lot, so I mostly engage with my family a lot over things like Skype. And my wife actually Skyped me shortly afterwards to let me know how she felt about the new policy. Needless to say, she wasn't really thrilled with the whole thing. Apparently, when you tell the firewall that people shouldn't have anything to do with alcohol, if there's any alcohol in a recipe, that would trigger it, and if there's a knife, that is a weapon. And it just didn't quite work out exactly the way I hoped. So eventually, I kind of opened up. I thought I should share with you exactly what my home network looks like. And it does evolve over time. Of course, I have the big bad internet, like everybody does. I actually, just in the last year, upgraded to 150 megabit service in my house. If you told me 5 years ago one day I'd have 150 meg service in my house, I would have laughed at you. Now I have 150 meg and I still complain that it's slow. By the way, once you do that, there's no going back, so don't necessarily jump for that big bandwidth package unless you're ready for it. I have to confess that we're mostly an Apple household. The reason being is, of course, my daughter, right when she was due for a PC upgrade, it was right around when Vista came out, and I was so tired of coming home after a week of traveling and reloading their operating system, patching something, and uninstalling something else. I said, you know what, we're going to try this Apple thing. And the experiment went so well, the entire family has Macs. Now I've got iPads, iPhones, and iPods. Must be like a dozen of them laying around the house. It's crazy how much there are. We also have our media servers, our Apple TV. Bring them in here. Sorry, the internet connection. We have our Apple TVs, a little Xbox. Of course, who doesn't have that? I'm also a big Unix BSD guy, so I have all my servers in there, running all kinds of various things, including some media management software tools and things like that. And generally speaking, this is really what I refer to as my home net. I forgot to mention, my wife also runs a business out of the house, so she has a credit card machine. I have that funneled in on a PCI connection. Wherever audited, I think we're good, although that hasn't come yet. And essentially, this is my home net. And from a rules perspective, I've had to take the approach of just allow it all. Just let it go. See what happens, and we'll live with it from there. This is all currently running now inside an ESX server, more or less, except for the kid stuff. Various times I've had it on physical hardware, virtual hardware, mix and match. At one point I had 12 servers running in the house, which the wife wasn't too thrilled with A, the noise, and B, the electrical bill was a little brutal. But as a consequence, I can see lots of interesting things. Like, for example, the use of Facebook by my wife and I compared to the kids. Much different in terms of how they interact with these sort of things. I also use the firewall as a tool to teach and educate my kids. For example, it's very hard to stop them from surfing the web all night, right? If they want to sneak up and do it, I mean, who can really keep track of that? But I use the technology in our firewall known as user check to actually interact with them. So at some point in the evening, if they're surfing along, the firewall interjects and gives them this little option here. It says, hey, you're going to surf all night. Well, what are you going to do? Do you want to do that? And they have to go, okay. That way when they get up in the morning and go, Dad, my stomach hurts. Just pull up the firewall logs. No, last night at 2 in the morning you agreed you were going to school. I actually only had to do that to my son once, and he never did that again. I felt so bad at dragging his school book in after school. He was dead to the world, but he figured out that Dad was going to make him go if he agreed, of course, to this. I also use it to ground my kids. Oh, sorry. I also use it to wish my wife happy birthday. The firewall's tuned so that on the day of her birthday, it reaches out and just says, hey, happy birthday. See, firewall security doesn't have to be all about mean and blocking stuff. We can be friendly. We can reach out and say hello. And of course, I've used it to ground, for example, my daughter. She was caught signing a test, forging my wife's signature because she didn't want us to see how badly she did in the test. She was quickly found out, and this was her grounding. Grounding is very different. When I was a kid, as soon as I was old enough to get on a bike, I just left the house. I would never hang out with my parents. My kids, I can't seem to get them out of the house. They always want to hang around us, which is very strange, especially having an 18-year-old. And another friend of mine made this comment too. He says, you notice that the kids, they just hang around the house. When we were kids, last place I wanted to be was near my parents. But then I brought up a good point, which was, if back then you told me I could have this little glass-shaped device that displayed 24/7 all the porn in the world, would you have left the house? And he went, oh, that's a good point. I don't think I would have left my room. So it is a different world in that way. Now, I must confess, I'm running this full-on checkpoint suite at home and all this technology. I get a little bit of arrogance. I plug in. I'm like, what are you going to do to me? I got some of the best security in the world. Come at me. And of course, I see tons of attacks all the time. I'm not going to sit and go through them all. This is ridiculous. We all know what happens. They come pouring in. The ones I find interesting, though, are the attacks that are happening to me when I'm doing, for example, the browsing. I saw this one, and I thought, how did that happen? And sure enough, when I go digging in, I went to the site. I remember what happened. I had to work on a Sunday. I didn't want to drag the TV into the lab area, but I really wanted to catch the football game, so I thought maybe I could just catch it online. All I did was look at the front page and went, it looks kind of dodgy. I'm not going to do that. And there was an exploit run, but of course, it was an exploit against, Internet Explorer. I'm a Mac house. I'm involved. I don't care. On top of having all the security, what's the big deal? Nothing could possibly happen to me, and I lived for a long time in that false sense of security that my Mac is just, nobody's going after them. They're hard to attack. Forget about it. And then this summer, something interesting happened. I upgraded our system, which now included this new feature for bot detection, malware, that sort of thing. I didn't actually activate it or do much with it because I got a house full of Macs. What's going to happen to me? But it was on as default, and sure enough, after I turned it on, literally the next day, I started getting these hits. And they kept happening every day, so I started thinking, well, I should probably figure out what that is. But when I clicked through to look at it, unfortunately, because I had a very passive default setting, I wasn't actually doing anything. When I looked it up, it turns out it was nothing more than my DNS server was doing a lookup for a site known to carry malicious sites, but it couldn't qualify anything beyond that, unless I turned on a feature called the DNS Trapper, which essentially allows me to tell the firewall, if you see this lookup happen, replace the IP with your IP address, so the user connects directly to you. It just proxies it through. The user doesn't see anything happen, but then the firewall can take a little closer look and figure out what's going on. So I turned that on, and lo and behold, the very next day, there was a significant increase in information. And that's when I had to come to the realization that, oh my God, I've got bots in my house, in my Macs. How is that possible? Worse off, who could it be? My son started downloading stuff in peer-to-peer, what should I tell him? My wife will click on anything you send her, just a couple times if it doesn't appear to work. My daughter, who's always on these social networking sites, Who was it you think brought this bot into my house? It was me! Matter of fact, it was that machine right there. I was horrified. As a matter of fact, I panicked and immediately searched out all 8 botnets I think that existed for Mac at the time. Nothing. Mac kept coming up clean. So after I calmed myself down and I took a closer look, I realized that the bot it was detecting was an MSN spam bot. It wasn't really a dangerous bot. All it did was capture your MSN login credentials and spam your friends. I don't use MSN, I don't even use Windows, so it was really of no effect to me, but I'm thinking, how is that possible, except then I realized, I do have a VM on my Mac. And at some point, it got infected with some little bot, a fairly innocuous one, but what really puzzled me was, I don't fire this thing up a whole lot, I don't web browse with it, how on earth did that thing get a bot? No idea actually to this day, but cleaned it off, and I'm back to feeling really good, real safe, the fact that we got Macs, you got a Mac, everything's great. But then literally a week later, this happened. All of a sudden, out of the blue, I get, and these are reds, which means now the firewall's detected something is definitely malicious and definitely problematic. And when I looked it up, lo and behold, it's my son on his MacBook Pro with no VM machine. This is a full-on Mac bot. And we did find it, cleaned it up, and sure enough, he actually got himself infected. And I started thinking, how could this happen? It literally just popped up one day. So I started looking back through the logs, and lo and behold, there was a detect action. There was a detect action for a QuickTime heap overflow, actually specific to Apple. And sure enough, when I did the review, did allow remote code to be executed on it. The part that really annoyed me about this, of course, was I downloaded this protection easily about a week before my son got hit with the attack. But being an old school IPS guy from the 90s, I had this attitude of, well, I'll download any new protections, but I'll put them in detect mode by default until such time that I feel they're appropriate, in which case I'll turn them to block. Which is a dumb idea, because we don't really have that kind of time in this day and age. In the 90s, that would have worked great. Today, you're lucky if you've got minutes from when we're learning about some of these things. And to make matters worse, I actually know what goes on behind the scene. I've sat with some developer teams around the world. There's people dedicated to my company who do nothing else nonstop but analyze attacks and build protections. And I was too arrogant to turn them on for some strange reason. Again, it's set in our mind, their ways. I bring this up just to remind us that we are in a different time in the sense that we have to be more proactive with our protections. This whole detect attitude is only going to come back and bite you sooner than later. But that's not really what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is the other extremely interesting things I discovered, which was, what was the security learning about the people in my house? I saw lots of activity. Here's a breakdown of, the average week in my house. My son, for example, running Hamachi. He thinks I don't know, but I know exactly it's there. He uses it for his layer 2 VPN for some of his video games. I also run a data loss prevention policy in my house. Now, a lot of you are probably thinking, DLP in your house, really? Do I have the big corporate secrets? And that's not it at all. Actually, here's a look at my policy that I have running at home. It's actually a very handy policy. I'll explain it for you. So, obviously, I look for credit cards, because if I see that, it means my wife's buying something. Don't laugh, that's a real problem. Also, I look for common medical terms. Again, you're probably thinking, who on earth would look for common medical terms in your house? Well, I have 2 kids that have grown up with unlimited access to Google and Yahoo and all those other wonderful tools. If they have a question about their body when they're growing up, are they going to come to me first, or are they going to ask Google? It's kind of like an early warning system, something going on. I also look for inappropriate language, more so for fun, because, it's funny to look at it. I tease the kids with what I call the swear chart. I can run a chart at the top. Most inappropriate language in the house. They always think that's thrilling. And of course, I always watch for personal information. And at that point, actually, I let them make a decision in terms of whether or not they want to allow that information to go out. And this gives me a whole new context of what's really going on in my environment. I always chuckle whenever I see people tell me, oh, we installed the new firewall services, and oh, we got a next-gen firewall, and we plugged it in, and guess what? 98% of the organization is using Facebook. Well, I could have told you that. I didn't need to plug anything in. But what are they doing on Facebook? What context do you have around what activities? For example, in my house, when my daughter, I don't just know they're on Facebook, but for example, when my daughter's on Facebook and she, for example, tagged my wife in a picture, I get a flag that something was going on, personally identifying it. Sure enough, she put a picture up from a trip we did to New York. It gives me a lot of visibility and context into the kind of things that's going on. I'm able to collect a ton of information and data around the activities around. When my daughter decided to apply for a job, I knew about it. I knew exactly where she was applying. I also knew that she was giving out her social insurance number to any website that would ask for it because she wanted to have a complete resume, even though technically they don't need that sort of thing. Has anybody here used Steam, the video game system Steam? Do you know that when that thing does a dump file and sends it out, it actually includes a whole bunch of personal information from the system it dumps on? Just something to keep in mind. These are things I was learning as I went along. I thought I'd share it with you. I also have, of course, guests in my network. This is my daughter's boyfriend, Chris. As you can see, he likes Pornhub.com. He's also big into podcasts. As it turns out, the kind of podcasts he likes are, nakednews.com. He's also a fan of MrSkin.com. By the way, before you think, oh my God, what are you doing to this poor boy? I didn't turn off the IPS protections for him, so when he's in my house, he's still under my protection, and I didn't, I have to let this guy go to the waste. But it's been kind of handy. For example, when I first met him, he knows I'm from Toronto. I'm actually a Montreal Canadiens fan. So I love the Habs. He goes, oh, I love the Habs too. And I said, oh, really? Then why does your phone keep fetching the scores for the Vancouver Canucks? So it's just one of those, don't lie to me, kid. I see it all. I have a love-hate relationship with her boyfriend. But I want to go into something a little more interesting, and that is my guest network. I have attached to my system an open Wi-Fi, it's 150 megabit internet service. You are all welcome to come to my home and surf the web all you want. I have it wide open. You just have to go through a captive portal I have set up. Really, all I ask you for is your name and email, and what's your favorite movie? Because at the time I thought that was funny. Oh yeah, and I should mention, you also have to agree to my terms of service, which is just click a box and say okay. Unless, of course, you actually wanted to take the time to read my terms of service. They look a little like this, well, it used to, I used to just say, your data's mine, I'm going to do whatever I want with it, screw you. But then I actually, under advice of a friend, they said you should probably get a little more detailed. So I actually took Google and Facebook's terms of service as a template and rewrote my terms of service to actually mimic theirs, just replacing their information with mine. And guess what? It still says the same thing. Your data's mine, screw you. I'll do whatever I want with it. You don't like it? Leave. Don't use it. So, of course, we're probably thinking, who on earth would ever sign up for something like this? People would never sign up for something like this. Well, of course, we all sign up for Facebook and Google. Well, folks, I'd like you to meet Tony. Tony can be reached at tmarcom@hotmail.com, and his favorite movie is King Kong. Or, here's my personal favorite, Mitch. I like Mitch. Mitch and I go way back because Mitch spent a lot of time on my network. A lot of time, enough time actually for me to start to build some profiles and information about him. I thought I'd share with you now a little bit about this gentleman, Mitch, that we met. So Mitch runs Windows, right? And of course, upon closer analysis, he was actually running a version of Vista. I can tell based on the service pack, so you can try to call. He's also an Adobe, Flash user. Hey, who doesn't use Flash, right? Gotta love Flash. His favorite web browser is Mozilla. He's of course also running Java. Hey, who doesn't? Now at the time, this is last year, I didn't think that was a big deal, but now it turns out, that was a huge deal. He also uses Skype to chat with his friends, as well as, of course, he's a Facebook user. But of course, Facebook's encrypted, right? I'm not really going to see anything going on in Facebook. Well, that's not entirely true. Maybe I don't have his login, but I do get to see all the places he goes and the things he connects to and looks at on Facebook. Like, for example, this is Mitch's girlfriend. This is Mitch when he was a kid. This is Freddy Krueger. He had an unnatural fascination with Freddy Krueger. He must have looked at like 30 Freddy Krueger pics while he was on there. I'm really not sure why. Maybe he was preparing for something or was just a huge fan. By the way, he also uses Facebook chat. Of course, Facebook chat's encrypted too, right? But if you take a look at this URL call, I apologize, it's quite small, but there's all these ID numbers here. Does anybody know what those ID numbers are? You use the Facebook API. It tells me exactly who Mitch's friends are, who he likes to chat with, who he's hanging out with online. They're all listed in front of me. I just go to the API and pull out the names. That's how I figured out who his girlfriend was. At least I assume it's his girlfriend. I spent a lot of time talking to her. He's also a bit of a gamer. I know this because he went to Yahoo Services and started looking at this, so I think he's trying to figure out how to breakthrough pro mode on NHL 10. He's also a big fan of anime, because while he was on my network, he went to this website and watched this video, and then he watched this video. But hey, don't you guys worry about Mitch here. He's got security. I'm sure he's safe. Now let's think about this for a second. I've got this strange, unknown person in my network. Actually, they're not really strange or unknown. It's Mitch. Hi, Mitch. How you doing? In just 3 applications that Mitch ran last year across my network, I have a combination of about 165 exploit possibilities to get inside his network. Get inside his system. Not only that, but I know who Mitch likes to hang out with. I know what he's interested in. I know who his friends are. How hard would it be to craft an email to Mitch to go, hey, check out this new anime site? How hard would it be? It'd be almost trivial at this point. And that's not even getting to the fact that he was connected later to my network with Vista. I mean, at that point, it's almost silly. But let me bring up a point here. For all the things we laugh about from Mitch, we worry about this. I've actually had some challenges on Facebook with some friends where I've befriended them, I've had to get rid of them because you have, those friends that click on anything, no matter what. Like, you wanted to tell them, you're like, look, you're not winning an iPad. No, I'm going to win that iPad. They're a problem to you because what if Mitch really isn't my target? What if I want to go after one of Mitch's friends? He becomes that conduit into them. So there's a responsibility for all of us to consider how we're using and accessing our data because as we expose this stuff, we expose everybody who gets connected to us as well, whether we like it or not. By the way, before you say I'm being too harsh on these people, I'd just like to point out that if they stick around too long, actually, they'll get a little pop-up just reminding them, hey, I'm going to help myself to whatever you want, help yourself to whatever you want, I know I will. Just like I say, a quick little reminder. Now, this works so well, as you can see daily. I get regular activity from guest networks just randomly around the house. I thought, what if I started asking for some more information, like name, email, and a phone number, and I'll make them a requirement. I figure if this works, then I'll start asking for like social insurance number, date of birth, first address. This could get really interesting. Of course, who on earth would ever sign up for something like that? Well, folks, I'd like you to meet Manny. If you want to give Manny a call, you can reach him at 647-888-9047 and ask him what the heck he was thinking. But this, I thought, wasn't even quite enough. We know people are crazy, they'll type in anything for free internet. What if I took this a step further? And I did. I said, I want to get more involved. So I created a new data set called Conversation. Now, how did I create this data set? I literally went to Google and said, give me the top 1,000 most common words used in conversations. Just whatever. It's CSV format if you got it, please. And up it popped, and it turns out actually I didn't even use the top 1,000. I think I used maybe like 50 or 100 of them. Because a lot of them are they start to repeat after the first while. And sure enough, I found it in Excel format. I created this rule that said, look, anybody on my guest network, I did not do this to my family, on my guest network, monitor anything that hits on these words and show me what you got. I cannot describe to you the amount of data that came pouring in from random guests connecting to my network. There's so much that there's really no way I could articulate it all, but I thought I'd make it into a little movie preview for you here. Take a look. about my neighbors. Really didn't need to know. People expose a lot when they think they're private. But I wanted to take this yet a step further. Now I had all these random conversations that were dropping in front of me. Some of them quite entertaining, actually, I must confess. But I thought, what if I could really zero in? What can I really learn about somebody? I have no idea who these people are connecting, where they are. What could I figure out about that? So I decided to pick on one particular person. This is Ronnie. Ronnie actually hung around for about 72 hours on my network. So I thought, well, because I'm correlating the data loss prevention along with URLs and everything together, I said, what do I learn if I follow through and see what this person is doing? And of course, actually, the first hit I got from the data loss was, if you like what you see, don't be afraid. Oh, I'm not afraid. Let's see what we got here. And I started digging in, and the next piece he posted was, these online dating sites can be such a drag. He'd gone to an online dating site. Has anybody heard of POF.com? I've been married a long time, so I'm kind of dating scene. This place called Plenty of Fish. He literally came onto my network, and the first thing he did was go to join a dating site and create himself a little profile here. And then he proceeded to browse to this girl's profile and send her this private message. Gwen, sweet Gwen, you're gonna brighten my day. Gwen, sweet, thanks. Real slick talker, this guy. But then he went immediately to this girl's profile. By the way, he looked at a couple of profiles where he decided not to send a message. Then he went to this girl's profile and he sent her this message, which I found a little creepy. Your look so simple, but yet so darn hot. Did he just call her simple? I know I've been out of the dating scene a while, but that seems a little weird to me. May explain why he's spending so much time on the dating site. But then he went to this girl's site, sent her a message too, talking about how sexy she was for 32. Which, again, served to make me feel older and older. But I thought, what else can I pull of? How do I figure out who this person really is? And I realized, actually, as I went back to the data set, that Firewall had captured much more than just the data there. It captured all the information that came around with it, like, for example, a cookie. And I noticed, when I looked a little closer in this cookie, there's this field called Fantabulous Fraser username equals. I thought, that's interesting. So without having to require any account, I went to the website Plenty of Fish, and I typed in Fantabulous Fraser, and look, these online dating sites can be such a drag. These online dating sites can be such a drag. Bingo, got it. Matter of fact, you see that? That's his house there. Do you know whose house is sitting directly behind that one? Mine. I guess he liked my internet better than his own internet. Now, this could get even weirder, of course, if I wanted to really haunt him. For example, I can use compound data types. And what that means is I can start to drill into, for example, looking specifically for credit cards or not looking for them. We've designed these tools so that you can exclude certain data types and not be seen. But how hard would it be for an administrator of your company to go find the CFO and look for any financial information in credit cards when it passes by? You see how this quickly flips and becomes the opposite of protecting. It goes into hurting somebody potentially. But with all this information, I get to see all the activity. For example, this is my daughter in 1 week. And of course I get the browse time now too, which is scary. It's like, you spent 5 hours looking at Vine videos? What the heck is wrong with you? Those are 6-second videos. 5 hours, really? And by the way, just a reminder, in case we've all forgotten, no certificate was harmed in making this presentation. Didn't damage a single one of them. Now, I know a lot of vendors out there, myself included, like to put out security reports where they consolidate kind of data that's been collected over a period of a year and make some assumptions and analysis. I thought I'd like to do that for you too, but I didn't really want to use my company's data. Sure, it's interesting, but they've already got their report. I thought I'd share with you the 13 Kellman report based on the data I collected. You guys interested? Yeah? Here's what I learned about my network. So first off, the big thing I learned was my children do not watch TV, period. They're not interested at all. They never turn it on. They watch everything online. If they can't point and click and watch it immediately, they're simply not interested. I wonder how much of TV companies actually understand that. When my kids leave and start their own lives, TV isn't just the last thing on the list they're going to get. It's not on the list. And there's a reason why, actually. I went to my son finally. I'm like, when I was a kid, I loved TV. Why don't you like TV? And once I tell you this, you can't unsee this. He says, well, Dad, it's really slow and clunky. You got to scroll through this guide thing, and it's like just channel after channel of the same thing. Even though we have 500 channels, there's really only 2 things running. By the time I find something, it's halfway through, and he says, not interested. And sure enough, the next time I'm in front of the TV, I'm like, oh my God, he's right. This is archaic. What am I doing? And of course, in the house, it's the majority of it is my daughter, my son, as you see, watches a ton of media. The NA there's no username for that because those are my Apple TVs, so that's people watching the Apple TVs. Now, I also have a breakdown of all the people that have used my Wi-Fi, the top people. I know this is a friend of my son's, a friend of my daughter's, they were over quite a bit. That in and of itself wasn't, I'm sure, that interesting for you. But there was something interesting for me that came up, that I'd like to share with all of you. While I ran this report, there was a piece of data that started reoccurring, a pattern that appeared. And what that pattern was is every time somebody connected to my Wi-Fi for the first time I ever saw them, they would send a single piece of data to Google and then never send it again. Didn't matter whether it was an iPhone, an iPad, a Mac, a PC, whatever it was, this was the data they would send. Does anybody know what this is? Anyone? The location services stuff. You heard about that? So I don't know if you guys realize, but every time you connect to a new Wi-Fi, you actually gather up all this information, your system does, and sends this to Google. Well, we now understand probably more for the NSA than Google. Somebody wants this. But if you take a closer look at this data, it's every Wi-Fi hotspot in my neighborhood, including signal strength, MAC address, signal-to-noise ratio, everything you possibly need to correlate where people are. They do this enough. I just found that was kind of interesting that this data was out there. I had no idea. I actually had to look it up. And it turns out there's no way to opt out unless you rename your SSID as something like No Google or something, which I was actually very distraught with that I had not heard of this before until I looked for it. Would you like to see a summary of the inappropriate language for the year? Cover your eyes if you're easily offended. First thing I'd like to point out, though, is contrary to popular belief, my daughter is not the most foul-mouthed in the house. It's actually my wife at 61%. Off the charts. Now, the top 10 inappropriate language used in my house last year, spanning, of course, over the entire year. Ta-da! Now, this one surprised me. I wasn't exactly sure why porn would be the #1 thing. The other stuff I can kind of make sense of. This one I find rather unnerving, but what are you going to do? They're growing up, you gotta let them. But the porn one really threw me off. Who was talking about porn that much? So I looked it up, and sure enough, it was my wife. And what was going on was she's on all of her social networking, her messages, her email, everything. She was sending messages to people, or people would send her video links, and she asked, "Is this porn?" And go, "Yeah, no, it's not. Why do you ask?" And over again, she would tell people, "I can't watch porn online because my husband will see it, and that would be embarrassing." I had no idea this was a problem. Hadn't even crossed my mind, actually. Sure enough, I ran a report, and hers, the amount of porn hits that, truthfully, those would count for just advertising you'd see in a website. I have guests on my network that looked at more porn than her. My son, by the way, last year was the year my son, at 11 years old, started looking at pornography. I was very disturbed by that. I had to cut this off here because I don't want you to see how much pornography my daughter watches. Although at this point, I suspect she does it just to drive me insane, because I see these logs and when I go to the garage and bang my head against a cement wall. But there's a solution for this. I actually created a new rule because of this for my wife. She's allowed to go all the sex sites she wants, and told the firewall, just ignore it. Don't say anything. It's okay. She's an adult. Let her do whatever she wants. Now, of course, in the real world, we have controls to make sure that this rule stays in place and is in effect. We all know about audit compliance. But how does my wife really know, right? How does she know I'm not going to come in tomorrow and flip it back and change it on her? We don't have this kind of level of control when it comes into the end users. We just see it in the business where we're able to say, hey, this is what we're doing. And so when you start to think about all this data that's being collected and uncollected, the reality is over time, we've seemed to forget that this isn't just data, this isn't just files, this isn't just, these are people's lives that are going through here. Things they believe, things they think, things that are important to them, things that are frightening for them. And we're almost, taking advantage of that in a sense. And this is why I bring this up, because there's things happening now within your government, my government, that really, really concern us. In the US, you've been hearing this for years, you've got to put in protections, right? We've got to be able to spy on the internet because, things, and this is going back a while. It turns out that they didn't meet the law, so I don't know why they actually went through the effort. That was a big thing for us in Canada when a gentleman, our public safety minister, Vic Toes, came out and told us that they had to have unfettered access to all data passing so they can catch child pornographers. And if you don't agree with that, then you must support child pornographers, which I took a bit of offense at. And of course, got the attention of the group Anonymous, who then outed him and his mistress, Stacey Meeks, which actually only served to cause even more of a problem, because then, he was like, look, see, this is why we need this kind of protection. But if you look at the things that Snowden revealed, this quickly went from, oh, what if, to absolutely. Think about the things I was able to collect passively. I didn't even do any SSL insertion. I didn't break anything. I'm just passively looking at it. I'm collecting it, correlating over the course of a year. Imagine this done on a large scale with the access these guys have. What this really means. I don't think a lot of people appreciate. Now, we're in the security field, so I think we do. But I think we have a job to do in terms of educating the rest of the public about what this really means, the kind of information to be gathered. By the way, anybody notice something interesting about this? Notice when Apple joined? Isn't that weird? Actually, it coincides with about 6 months after Steve Jobs' death. They joined. You know what else happened at that time? This chief technology officer from Adobe left Adobe and went to Apple. That caught my attention because Steve Jobs really hated Adobe and Flash, did he not? To the point where I have to say, when I look back at it, he was over the top. Like, I can understand him not wanting the platform. I agree, it's kind of a resource hog and crappy. But to block it from even going in the App Store, I remember at the time thinking, oh, you're creating some kind of walled garden to keep us to yourself. But now I'm rethinking that and thinking, actually, I think you might have been creating that walled garden to keep something out. What would be a great cross-platform application that could access all our keyboards and our screens and our mouse and our microphones? Just something to think about. I don't say I have any particular information here. But what concerns me is this data is floating up there. It's being collected now. And we have to stop this whole black and white, 1 and 0, it's good or it's bad, all right? The NSA or the government is not a person, a thing. It's many people, tens of thousands of people. And some of them are good, and some of them are bad. So we have to accept that good and bad things are going to come from this data, no matter what we say or do or think about it. I'm just a little concerned about, for example, those big lobbyist groups who can, start to make requests to get information about things that maybe I don't necessarily agree with. For example, they're asking to make it legal for them to put rootkits on it. Not that they haven't been doing it already, silly. But the part that scares me the most about all this, of course, is they want me to believe that with all this data floating by, they have this magic brain that just can come in and filter out, and it just knows. So if they say, oh, this is what we see, this is what it absolutely means, it's right. But let me ask you a really hard question. And a question, because we struggle with this in our industry, right? How do you really tell what's going on? But the challenge I have is in this incredibly connected world, with all this activity and things going on, and this mysterious, collection brain that's able to understand everything that's going on. Does it truly understand that the connection made from my machine was actually me or somebody that's hijacked my machine? Because if you remember, I have some of the best security in the world. I use an operating system that's not traditionally attacked. And I got a bot. I got a couple of them in there, actually, over the course of years. What is the average person going to do? How do you think they're faring? And do we have the ability to collect the data and say, hey, grandma's surfing child porn, or is it a bot that's on there? Or do we have that context? I don't believe it's there. So we have to be very careful about this data that's being collected, because at some point it may be used against us or for us, but without the context. Remember all that stuff I told you about Mitch? I don't really know anything about Mitch. I only know what I was able to tell you. And in case you didn't catch on, folks, we're Mitch. It's happening to us now. Now, before I leave, I want to leave you with just one last thing. One of the most asked questions I get about this is, what on earth does your wife and your family think of this? So I figured rather than speak on their behalf, I'd let my wife tell you for me. So one of the most asked questions I get in the presentation is what you and all the family think of all the power control, the monitoring, the swear chart, all these things. What do you think of that level of security you have?
Initially, I didn't like it because I should still have to go for it, but trying to find a recipe, it contained alcohol or a knife for chopping or slicing. I couldn't pull that recipe up because county had put filters to prevent the kids from searching for weapons, from searching for drugs or anything else. I can't have an internet affair anymore like the rest of my friends probably because, they'll know about it.
Why is that a big deal?
I did after the
She threw me off there.
Like that big brother, also known as Kellman in our house, is watching everything I make. I'm concerned for anything now because I yelled at you enough to open up certain things. But prior to that, yeah, it was an issue. I couldn't search for certain things because you had permissions or whatever you're doing. I don't know.
Okay. How many of your friends have suffered downtime
All the
because of?
time. I've had friends that go offline for weeks at a time, and then all of a sudden they'll pop back up online and say, "I'm back," you know, after a wicked garden or this or that.
And how many times has that happened to you?
So I have to be grateful for that.
So maybe the trade-off of being monitoring is you can surf the web free and clear knowing somebody else has got your back.
Yeah, but it's you.
Better you guy.
Yes.
Okay, so are you for or against this level of security? Would you rather I ripped it out tomorrow and left you naked on the internet?
No, I like the security in terms of, I know the viruses, I know the time and stuff like that, but in terms of even the kids doing their thing online, you know, sometimes Meghu sits down and we talk about what the kids have been looking at, and I don't want to know. There are certain things I just don't want to know about my kids, and I think that they need to have a certain level of privacy, because we didn't grow up like this. I turned out okay, relatively speaking. My kids, I'm sure, will be fine, but now they're monitored on this whole new level, and I don't like that. I don't agree with that.
Well, I agree with you that they're monitored on a whole new level, and we didn't grow up with that, but we also didn't grow up with access to this level of technology and information.
True.
All right, so it's a whole new game for everybody. And by the way, if it's not me monitoring, you know, it's also our government, politics, bad guys, anyway, right? So what if I could offer you an extra layer of protection on that as well?
Against the government?
Yeah.
I take that.
Well, matter of fact, I think you have some in the house, don't you? What kind of TV shows do you watch again? Do you subscribe to HBO?
No.
And do you enjoy your HBO shows?
Very so.
Have you ever gotten an email saying, hey, stop downloading, you're violating copyright? Have you heard anyone knock at the door or serve your papers?
No, not yet.
So there's a level of protection there too.
For now.
All right, so thumbs up or thumbs down on the security? Well, I can turn it off tomorrow, you know, leave you clear and naked on the internet.
No, you can keep it on, but just stop telling me what the kids do.
Fair enough.
She brings up a great point, though, and I just want to leave you that to remember. These tools we have are getting more and more powerful, collecting more and more information, and the side effect of the security we're offering is that data collected can start to be used against us. So think about how you're controlling and containing that, not just in your home, but in your work as well. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I appreciate it all, and hope you enjoy the rest of the show. Take care.